Hello and welcome to today's session, Q&A session from Philantropia. I think we'll give it another 1 or 2 minutes to see if more people, or to give more people the chance to join, and then we will get started. Hello and welcome again. Hello and welcome again to today's Q&A session by Philantropia. Also, a very warm welcome to everybody listening in on YouTube Live. We are streaming live on YouTube, so that is great that we are using that as well. Hi, and I hope you will join every single one of our streams in the future and stay with us. So today we have an open Q&A session, so you can ask questions about fundraising, resource mobilization, and I will go through them. We have received a couple of questions beforehand by email that I will go through. Otherwise, you can ask your questions today as well. So you see that there's a Q&A box that you can use for questions, and you already discovered the chat. So you can chat with each other in the chat box whenever I mention a course or any resources, anything that my team will also post the link to those resources. So that's the way we're going to be using the chat. If you have a question that you want me to answer or me to see, then please use the Q&A box. But again, just use that for questions that you want me to answer. Everything else should be done in the chat. Yeah, I'm really excited for today's session. These sessions are always nice to just kind of talk about the things that are on your mind, that you need answers to. And I hope they are also very useful for you. My name is Eva. I am a geographer. I have a PhD degree in geography, but I have been working in development cooperation for almost 15 years now. And I've been working with Philantropia since almost 2015, I think we started. I'm a content creator, and I do a lot of these webinars and online courses. So maybe you've seen my face before in one of our seminars. So I already see the first question. So maybe we can start with that one from Vicky. Hi, Eva. What is the difference between business development and fundraising? Well, I think the main difference, well, fundraising means to raise funds, to get money for a project or for anything you want to do. Doesn't have to be in the NGO world. What we are talking about here in these webinars is fundraising in the NGO world. So there's donations, etc. That's also not our focus. Our focus is grant writing. So I think the main difference is when you talk about business development, it's about your business ventures, and you're looking at the implications of specific developments for your business. You develop a business plan for how you want to go about your activities. When you think about fundraising, you develop a strategic plan for how to raise funds for that. And again, if you're in the business world, that can mean investors, that can mean taking out a loan, etc. In the development world, it mostly means applying for grants, setting up donation structures that work, etc. Then there's another question by Eric. Thank you very much. He says they followed me or us for many years and learned a lot. That is great. It seems to be impossible to find financing for a digital education project in Burkina Faso. Any tips? Yeah, there's specific areas, things that are a bit more difficult to find funding for. I think if you focus on digital education, there are a couple of donors that do like that innovative touch, because innovation is something that is always asked for. But maybe that's also a topic that you could address with companies, especially in the COVID crisis. Many of those software companies have become very big and have grown a lot, so that many of them are starting their corporate social responsibility programs now, or start for the first time to engage with NGOs, etc. So that's a good time to get in touch with them. So if your project is focused on digital education, maybe also not only look for institutional donors, but kind of open your roster a bit and also look for companies that could be potential partners. That can also be very, very helpful. In general, sometimes it's good to have a project plan and then look at it from different angles, so that you can find different kinds of donors. So instead of focusing on the digital part, focus more on the focus group, or on the target group. Who are you working with? Is that young people? Then maybe you can find donors that want to support young people and have that a focus. Is it, are you working in an area that has particularly high unemployment rates? Maybe there's a donor that wants to address that. Maybe you can look at your project from a bit of a different angle, and then that way find a donor and find supporters. How can I secure my first fund without a financial audit report and strategic plan, is another question by Angel. I think when you just start out and we don't have a lot of experience, you can't show a specific amount of grants that you've already applied to. You don't have all those records. One great thing to start is just to start with small grants. Just apply for something with a small number. So small grants can be anything between 2,000 and 10,000. Sometimes people even say 20,000 is still a small grant. If you apply for that, oftentimes you don't need stuff like a financial audit, a strategic plan, etc. if it's just for small amounts of money. And then if you apply for those small amounts of money, from there you can get, you can start and you can move further. So then maybe you don't have, maybe you don't need a financial audit report, but then you already can show a good track record with foundations, with other donors, and you can show, look, we've done these and these grants and they work very well for us. If you're very small, partnering up with another organization can also be a good step, because if you find an NGO partner who's bigger than you, who has more experience and has more has a better track record already, or maybe has a financial audit report, etc., and you partner up with them, then you can also apply through their documents, which can be very, very helpful. So looking for a partner can be a good way. If you try to enter a partnership, you do have to make good contracts. You have to make a good agreement with them so that everybody knows their roles, their responsibilities, and knows which tasks in the projects have to be done by whom, and also who gets how much money. Because partnerships always sound amazing, but then once there's money, it can get a bit more tricky and a bit more difficult. Then Emmanuel has a question: is corporate giving a good source of fundraising? It's a different source of fundraising. I think it is a very good source of fundraising, especially if you are working in communities that have a strong business background, business community. So asking corporations, especially corporations that have grown a lot in the past, can be a great source of income. They do have a lot of funding, oftentimes, especially regionally, locally. They do want to engage with social causes because they need that kind of credibility. But what you do have to understand is that they have very different motivation to do that. When a foundation funds a project, usually they have mostly altruistic motives. No, they just want to support. They don't have any self-interest in mind. But usually when a corporation does, they do want something in return. Usually that's marketing material, public relations material, etc. So they do want you to do something for them, which is to change the perception of their company in the public eye. So I think you do have to do much more due diligence when you want to work with corporations or companies, because you have to decide if are they using you just for greenwashing, for example, or do they really want to work with you? If you work in a project with children, then maybe it's not the best idea to partner up with that fashion company that has the reputation of working with child laborers or something like that. Then they just try to use you. Or if you are an environmental NGO and an oil company wants to partner up with you, maybe they just want to use you. So you do really have to look into the company, the background of the company, and if they are a good partner for you. But if you do that due diligence, they can be great partners, and there's a lot of money in that. So we do recommend you also reach out to businesses. And again, they, especially regionally, locally, they do support a lot. So that can be a really good source of income. Then there's a follow-up question by Angela. Can you recommend donors for small grants? That's very difficult. It's different in every country. Where I always start is embassies. That is usually most embassies have some funding available for, and they call that like a program to friendship program, or a program to enhance the relations with the host country, something like that. So for example, I know in Nepal, I used to always worked with the German embassy, but the American embassy had the same amount of funding. The Danish embassy had that, the Australian embassy, they all have small grant programs. So in most of the countries that you would be working in, if you contact the embassies, for example, the US embassy, the German embassy, Danish embassy, they do have those small grant programs that you can start with. That's a good way. And otherwise, you can research for small grants. If you just type in your country, small grant, like the words small grant and your area of work, oftentimes stuff comes up. That's a long question, so I was reading. So Joyce is asking, basically, what should you do if there's a donor, if you cross a donor that requests you to contact them first before submitting, but it's difficult to contact them and they don't get back to you? That is very difficult. It's also a bit stupid if they put specifically on their website, contact us, and then they don't get back to you. We talk a lot about those things in our course about donor networking, because it's in marketing, they call that the difference between a cold contact and a warm contact. So if you don't know anybody at that donor's office and you have no connection at all, and you keep sending emails, that's called a cold contact. So as you notice, it's very, very difficult to get an answer, to get them to get back to you, to answer you. So what can be easier is to try to find some kind of connection to someone working at that donor's office. That is what LinkedIn is great for, because you can see if you have common connections, you can see if you have anything in the past, like you worked at the same office one time, or you went to the same university, maybe you just from the same country, some personal connection that you can put into that email. Maybe you could have a better chance of someone answering to that email, or any personal connection you have to that donor. Maybe some of your staff members, your board members have any connections. Try to find someone there. I personally have had very good results with contacting people on LinkedIn. So instead of sending an email, sending a message on LinkedIn, connecting with them, and then explaining what you would what you want. Maybe you can also think about the wording of your email. We have resources in an article about how to word, how to formulate a cold email to a new donor. Maybe you can also look at that template and see if you can use something from that. But yeah, in general, it's very, very difficult to get through to people if they don't answer the phone. But maybe with those tips, you can get a step further. I would definitely try LinkedIn. And yeah, just keep at it. Of course, after a while, if they 100% never answer to anything, then maybe stop it and just move to the next donor. But I think I would give it a couple of more goes. Then Vicky is asking, what are some, I don't know, the questions keep jumping around, sorry. Okay, here we go. What are some tips for donor engagement when fundraising? So we always keep telling you fundraising is networking. So you do need all those connections, you need networks. And even if you have to send in a proposal, you still have to have a good network. And it's ideal if you can have a connection, a prior, some kind of engagement with that particular donor. So it's always good to go to conferences, to go to meetings, to workshops, and they don't have to be like big international conferences. Sometimes there's receptions in your country, again in embassies or at ministries, etc., that you get invited to, but because they sound boring, so many times people don't go. But those are the events where you can network, or if you can go to arts exhibitions, etc. Sometimes you will meet interesting people there that can be a good part of your network. If you have donors that you have talked with a couple of times, you can always ask if you can add them to your newsletter so that they always know what you are doing. You can ask if you can keep contacting them. You can invite them. All of those are things that you can do to make a relationship with a donor long-term and more reliable. No, and so those are things that I think I would recommend without knowing any more context. What kind of an NGO? What kind of? I think I'm not clear on the next question, so I'll just jump that one. Mary is asking about social impact funding. What does this mean, and how can one get the donors in that space? Social impact funding and all these things, it's also different words like startup, etc., are words used in that scene. It's basically the same with different vocabulary, I would say, because there's a shift, or not a shift, but there's a concentration focusing on impact a lot, but almost all donors do that, but just the traditional donors just keep their traditional vocabulary. But focusing more on the impact of activities and on the sustainability, because what has happened in the past many times is that donors have invested, donors have rolled out projects and the impact never came, or it was not measured, and they never knew what actually happened with their money. There's a lot of examples for development cooperation projects that didn't work so well for whichever reason, and donors want to avoid that. So after the Paris Accord and other the Paris Declaration, and the Accra Declaration, people focused more on impact and also impact measurement. So how can you measure the actual impact of a project? So that's why evaluation has become much more important. That's why developing the log frame is so important. And yeah, that's what donors focus on. And all these kind of newer players in this field then call that social impact funding, and use business tools that they have learned in their startup sphere, kind of, in the NGO sphere, which sometimes works quite well, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think basically it's not very, very different. Maybe you have to focus a bit more in showing what you actually want to achieve, what the impact will be, instead of focusing so much on activities and technicalities. Big difference is usually when you talk about social impact funding, people don't want to see like a big proposal document. It's more like they want to see a pitch deck. They want to see something interesting, something quick, something short. So it's more about the vocabulary, I would say, and not necessarily about the general approach. Then there's another question by Vicky. What are some obstacles or challenges one can expect when fundraising? There's many. Fundraising is a numbers game, so you have to, I think one of the most important things is to not get discouraged, because you will write proposals and you will get a lot of rejections, and you will have to keep at it. And sometimes you don't know why you got a rejection. Sometimes you feel like it's all just based on relationships, but you have to keep going. So I think that mixture of having to do all that networking legwork, while at the same time also producing quality proposals, quality projects, etc., is difficult. I think being a fundraiser is a challenging job, because you have many hats. You don't belong to any department in your organization. You have to kind of satisfy the demands of many sides. But at the same time, that holds a lot of potential. So that is the thing that I like about it. But you kind of have to be the person for that, no? So I think, yeah, maybe there can be many obstacles and challenges, but I think the most important one is to not get discouraged, because it can sometimes feel discouraging, but it's a numbers game. There's so many organizations out there that do amazing work and that all kind of compete with you for a limited amount of funding. And to not lose hope if something doesn't work is a very important step. You also have to understand that when you get a rejection, there's a couple of instances when it's your fault because you made a mistake, you didn't read the guidelines, whatever. But if you eliminate for all of that, or control for all of that, then often it's not your fault. It can be just bad luck, or it can be they ran out of money, or it can be your proposal was just at the bottom of the pile. It can be so many things. So not taking it personal and not getting discouraged, I think, is the biggest thing for me. Challenges, then David is asking for challenges that you can face in implementing a funded project. There's also many. That's a very, very broad question. I think one of the most important things that you should keep in mind is when you get funding, that you immediately look at the kind of report that you have to file in the end, because that's a very common mistake that many NGOs make, that they're happy about the money, they go to implementing the project, and then in the end, they look at the requirements for the final report and they realize, oh, we were supposed to collect specific documents at the beginning of a project or something like that, or we need those bills, or we need to have a different kind of invoice or whatever, and then it's very, very difficult to go back and collect that. So I think that is one of the very common mistakes that I would recommend you avoid, by properly reading the guidelines for reporting before you start, so that you can put everything in place. So sometimes there's requirements about public relations that you have to publish the name of the funder in the beginning of the project. And when you only read that at the end, then you've already missed that mark. No? So all those things are really, really important. And then I think making sure that the project is implemented the way that you proposed it, and that you keep a constant channel open with the donor, because sometimes there are changes, which is not a big deal. You just have to communicate it. You can't just change it and not communicate it and then just have it in the final report. So constantly talking to the donor, informing them, letting them know, and also letting them know if something's going wrong is very important, I think, because that way you kind of keep them in the loop, and then they understand what's happening. They understand what you are about, and they understand how they can interact with you and maybe support you. So I think those are the most important things. Ismail is asking about the project proposal and how can we adjust to the requirements and conditions in accordance with the needs assessment. I think, yeah, when we do webinars, whenever you listen to us, you will always hear us say, well, you have to adjust to the donor, you have to show them what they want to see, you have to write a proposal according to their guidelines. And that is true, because if you want to get funding, then that's what you have to do. But at the same time, it's very important that you don't lose your own focus. Now, you have to try to implement the projects that you want to do, that you know are good for the communities you work with. So if you write a project just to appease a donor's guidelines or requirements, that sometimes it's called mission creep, that when you change your mission almost to get a grant because you have to change up your program that much, that's also not good. So it has to be in accordance. So I think if you realize that a donor requires a specific approach that would not address the requirements that you have defined after your needs assessment, then either talk to the donor and say, well, this needs to be different, or look for a different donor at some point, because it needs to be a fit from both sides. No, not good if you have to change up too much. But that is also something in that networking process with the donor. It's something that you can communicate. You can say, well, we have the same goal, we have the same objective, but our way is different, or we need to include this because that's what the target groups say they need. And you need to hold that communication channel open. And there's a couple of questions about specific funding agencies. That's very difficult for me to tell you because I don't have all the foundations at the top of my head. We do have the donor database. If you've tried that out, if you haven't tried that out yet, it's a database with thousands of foundations in there. You just type in the country that you work in, the area that you work in. It gives you a list of foundations that have funded in that area in the past, or that do fund, or that do state on their website that they fund those kinds of activities. The donor database is free for 1 week. So you can just sign up, use it for a week. And then if you decide you don't want to pay for it, you just cancel your subscription. But if you do want to keep using it, then it's a very reasonable price. And it shows you a list and a starting point for your donor research, because then obviously you have to look further into all those foundations. You can't just think that list is the final list. Then you have to keep researching, etc. But that is already very, very helpful there. There's a couple of questions that are very, very specific and that I can't really answer with the limited amount of information given here. So I'm just looking at the chat, and there's a question about the donor database. My team is always posting links to the resources that I'm sharing here. So the link is right above your comment. And if you don't see it, it's donordatabase.org. So that's where you can find it. David is asking, when is funding taking place this year? Not sure if I understand the question correctly, but that is something interesting, because you can Usually, especially with official institutions, government institutions, etc., they have the end of the year is where they have to like show what they did with their budget. So it's often not a bad idea to send proposals if you are completely free to send them in October. Because if there's any funds left that they have to spend until the end of the year, that is when they have to kind of put them out. Some people, obviously, when often at the beginning of the year, the kind of pot of money is still full. But some people say that in their experience, donors are much more careful and much more hesitant to give out grants that time of the year because they feel like, oh, this has to be enough, this has to cover the entire year. But by the end, they have to spend their money because if they don't, then the next year they will get their budget slashed. They are more open. So October, September, October can be a good time to send a proposal. Obviously not a guarantee either, but that is the experience of many people that I have talked to. Emmanuel is asking if we can talk more about the use of artificial intelligence in grant writing, and this also relates to a question that we received beforehand about donors using AI to shortlist applications. And I think that is a very important topic because it's going to change so many things. So talking about the donor side, I think they do use artificial intelligence sometimes to scan for specific buzzwords, and that just speaks to the importance of really, really following the guidelines, because that is what they tell the AI to use, no? So when you don't follow the guidelines, when you make mistakes here, then your proposal might not even get read by a human person, but it will stick in that or stay in that process. So even more important to properly read the guidelines. And this is something that we recommend anyways, is to kind of mirror the language of the donors. That becomes more important as well. So use the vocabulary that they use. If they give you a structure for your proposal, then use the same words they are using, the same headings, instead of switching them up. Because if they say, what's the project background, and you call it justification, then for a human, it's still possible to say, well, project background and justification is kind of the same. AI, more difficult. And also, if you use their words, it's going to be also for the humans reading your proposal, it's going to be so much easier to see where you overlap if you're already using the same vocabulary. That goes for other things as well. If they call it countries of the South and you keep calling it developing countries, that's not a big problem. But if you call it countries of the South as well, they will see the overlap much quicker. So that's always a good idea, and it becomes more important as we move more into this kind of century of AI, I would say. And on the other side, I think you can use AI a lot to make your proposals stronger. You can try to use it for donor research, definitely. You can get a starting point. Because if you ask ChatGPT, who funds projects in my area, it already gives you answers, but at the same time, you have to keep in mind sometimes it makes stuff up as well, and it definitely won't cover everything. So you still have to do additional further research. But it can give you a starting point. And what it definitely can do is it can help you to write good text. It can help you to write an introduction letter, a cold email, etc. Be very careful of, you can never copy and use that then, because I think I can, not always, definitely not always, but sometimes I get an email and it strongly feels like it's AI, and I'm sure it is, because it's the same structure always, etc. So change things up, put in your own story, your own voice, etc. But it's a great starting point. And there's even some services that help you to write a proposal. It asks you questions, and you have to put in your information, then it kind of drafts a small proposal, a concept note. for you. So all of those are applications for AI in this process. Also, when you work with, when you collect donations, it's great to have a chatbot on your website, because when somebody contacts you, they need an answer very quickly. And if you use a chatbot, then yeah, you can give that answer very quickly. So there's many options. We also recorded a webinar just about this. So if you want to listen into that, that's also on our YouTube channel. So go and check that out if you're interested in learning more about the things or the chances that I see in that. Then Angel has another question: if we can support in developing a strategic plan and a resource mobilization plan. We do not offer that as a service, but we do have a lot of free resources and also a couple of paid resources if you want to go further in, if you want to go deeper about strategy development. So you can also check on our YouTube channel. There's webinars about developing a strategy that can help you. We give you a couple of strategic questions that you have to ask, or that you should ask to develop your strategy. And I think you will very quickly come up with a great plan of your own. Then Yaya is asking, what's the difference between a grants coordinator and a grants manager? I think that depends a lot on the office. I would always think, for us, the coordinator is higher than a manager. So probably the grants coordinator is the boss of the grants manager and oversees more processes at the same time and the grant manager maybe just one or two application processes or proposals, something like that. But that's my guess. But every organization is structured differently. Can be that they have it the other way around. What is the difference between the log frame and the actual activities of a project? That's a good question. Log frames are complicated and a challenge for many. The activities are kind of the base of the log frame. The log frame should be the objectives that you have, the assumptions that you have, and yeah, the outcome and output that you will have. So that comes after the activities. The activities are kind of the bottom of this log frame. In the log frame, you kind of move from one side to the other. You say, if this happens, then we assume this happens, and then the next stage happens. And then you have kind of this intervention logic. You have activities that lead to an output, that lead to an outcome, that lead to an impact. But the activities are not strictly part of the log frame. We do have a course on developing a log frame. So if you want to learn more about that, you can also look at the course on philantropia.org that we have there. David is asking, what tools and systems do you use to track donors? We basically use an Excel file, which is very simple. There's very sophisticated software, but I don't think that it does much more. So we do donor research every now and then, put in donors that we think are good prospects, and then update the file. We have a to-do list at the end that tells us, like, action points. What are we? Who's supposed to contact that donor? Who's supposed to do what? Are we supposed to send a proposal, concept note, etc.? We keep working in that file and update it regularly, and then an Excel file is basically enough. How often should you evaluate and revise a fundraising strategy? By Vicky. Every year, definitely. Not completely rewriting it, but looking at it. Are your goals still the same? Are the instruments you want to use still the same? Do you have any lessons learned from last year that you want to incorporate? Are there any new grants out there, etc.? Just keep doing that and adjusting, and that way it will be up to date. I don't think you need any specific tools. It's always a great idea, I think, to have at least a couple of general team meetings, have the point fundraising strategy included so that you can talk about it again. You can update everyone, and then you can see if the entire strategy needs an update, an adjustment, and this way you just keep it at the top of everybody's heads. Ismail is asking if we can share a guideline for a project proposal. So we have a template, I think, that has some leading questions that can guide you through developing a proposal. That is on proposals4ngos.com, I think, and also included in our proposal writing course. That is helpful. But in general, well, guidelines is different for every donor, so you really have to look into their own format. And that's connected to the next question. One format for every proposal, or does it vary? It varies. The things that we do, that we teach, are when nobody tells you what to do. Like if you're completely free. That's a structure that we offer that you can follow. But whenever the donor has any guidelines, any specific rules that they want you to follow, you always have to follow those. And they vary from donor to donor. Some want to know a lot, some want to know very little, some want you to focus on specific sections, some want a concept note, some want a full proposal. It varies. So you really have to check their guidelines, you have to check what they say, and check what they want to see. Then there's a question by Joyce, very specific as far as I understand. I think it's what happens when, what should we do when we enter a contract and then the situation changes drastically, and after that the donors don't want to keep working or say that you are failing to implement the project. I don't know the situation. Maybe you were great communicators, but oftentimes the reason for that is that a donor doesn't feel included from the beginning in those processes. Maybe they think you didn't you didn't look into the assumptions that you took properly, because maybe they think, oh, you could have foreseen that. I don't know. It is very difficult. And I think I would just try to talk to them personally again to clarify what the issue is, how this came about, and how you are trying to fix this and trying to adjust. Because usually for donors, they do want to keep working with you because they've already made their investment. It's not a good look for them either if they have to take back funding. So I would try to really salvage this and explain exactly how this came about, why you contacted them when you did, etc. And in the future, maybe you did that. I have no idea. Just in general, usually when something like that happens, it's because there was a lack of communication beforehand, because the first signs of problems, the first roadblocks were not communicated. And then when it is communicated, it's kind of too late. And then the donor is angry and feels betrayed somewhat. Then there's a question by Edi. Is it necessary to resend a rejected grant proposal after working on it again? It's always a good idea to ask for feedback. If you get a rejection, ask for them for feedback. And oftentimes they won't give you feedback by email. They just will give you feedback on the phone, because in writing it's much more difficult for them to kind of wiggle their way out of it again, and they don't want to be put anything in writing. So if you can ask on the phone for feedback, that's a good idea. Maybe you can also talk to others that did receive a grant and see where the differences are. But then in general, I think it can be a good idea to work on it again, but I would do a little bit more work than just reducing the amount. I would try to see where maybe the proposal was lacking in the first time, and then try to adjust and try to make it better that way. In general, it's not a bad idea, but it's better to see if you can get some kind of feedback so you know which sections you have to work on. Okay, then the last question we're taking, because we have 45 minutes and the time is almost up. For an NGO that wishes to focus more on unsolicited opportunities and co-creation, what strategies can we use? I think, then the networking becomes much more important. So you should still do donor research and try to identify foundations that work in the same field, that have the same ideas, the same values, the same mission and objectives as you do. And then, yeah, talk to them, reach out, try to start a conversation, ask them if they want to visit, etc., and develop those relationships, because then you can, yeah, work together and actually have ownership of a project together with the foundation, etc., and not be confined in the structure of grant application and open calls, etc. But that takes more work on that relationship building process. No, so reaching out, inviting people, talking, going to conferences, meeting people, and kind of extending your network constantly is the key here, I would say. Okay, so we had many questions. That's great. So I think we should keep up these sessions, right? Because they seem to really work for you. Thank you so much for being part of this again. Also for everybody watching on YouTube Live. It's really nice to have this opportunity to share with you. I hope I was able to answer most of your questions. If you have any further questions, you can always send them in. We will have another Q&A session soon and another webinar again in August. And if you are looking for further resources, again, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our social media, Facebook, LinkedIn. We always share stuff there. We have a newsletter where we share our resources, and you can check out philantropia.org for free courses, resources, and also paid courses that that we want to share with you. If you want to share any feedback with us, you can always send an email. That's always great to hear and nice to hear if these sessions are useful for you, if they do something for you. And obviously also if you have a constructive criticism, if you want us to address something different, etc., please let us know because we want to become better and we want to offer you the services that are actually helpful for you. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you in our next webinar again. Bye-bye.